Welcome everyone to Friday Office Hours. We're really excited you're here today. My name is Anna Shavers, and I am the Senior Communication Specialist at the All of Us Data and Research Center. Before I introduce our presenter today, I do have a couple announcements to share. First, as I mentioned before we started the recording, this meeting is recorded, and the recording will be posted within about 1 to 2 weeks on the User Support Hub and on our YouTube channel. So for the only announcement I do have for today is just a quick shout out about one of our support resources, the Community for All of Us researchers on the User Support Hub. The community is a place for registered All of Us researcher Workbench users to share tips for using the Workbench, receive support from other researchers, and find collaborators on research projects. You can actually access the community directly from the User Support Hub. You do need to be signed in, though, with your @researchallofus.org credentials in order to see all of the community activities and posts. And that is all of the announcements we have for today, so I will go ahead and do a quick introduction of our speaker today. We're really excited to have Dr. Holly Garriock to join us from the All of Us Research Program. Dr. Garriock is the Chief Cohort Development Officer for the All of Us Research Program. Holly came to All of Us from the National Institute of Mental Health, where she managed a research portfolio of children and adolescent depression, anxiety, suicide, and trauma that supported her growth and expertise in the fields of child development and mood disorders. Holly did her undergraduate training in Canada, graduate training at the University of Arizona, where she received her Ph.D. in genetics, and postdoctoral research at the University of California, San Francisco. And with that, I am actually going to hand it over to Holly.
Thanks, Anna. So great to see everybody here. And just grateful for the opportunity to be able to share with you how we developed these mental health and well-being surveys and what kind of access this provides for additional research. This was one of my goals as a human and as a scientist, is to try to get this kind of data into a precision medicine-like cohort so that some of the amazing research that I know all of you will do will be possible. So I'm going to try and share here and just give me a little bit of grace here, because hopefully everybody knows we've been converted to Teams. And as much as I am not a fan of Teams, I've lost a little bit of my Zoom knowledge here, but hopefully you can see my screen, kind of just the title slide.
Yes, we can.
Thanks so much. Okay, perfect. All right, so today I'll go over the 2 mental health and well-being surveys. That's the MHWB acronym that you'll see throughout. I'll describe for you how we made them, how they were created, and things that we put into consideration as we were thinking about participants completing those surveys. We'll discuss some of the data that's available, the potential research questions, using some use cases of questions that could be answered given the data that is now available. And we'll preview just a little bit of the demo project, some of the results there on those new surveys. And then Brandy will help us review how some of the off-cycle data set is stored in the researcher workbench. And so I have about 14, 15 slides and then plenty of time for question and answer afterwards. So let me get through it and then we can open up for questions, if that's all right. Okay. So this was our general approach to the development of the surveys. We pulled together a group of mental health clinicians, researchers, survey development experts, a lot of subject matter expertise really across the country, but really through the consortium as well as with our colleagues at the National Institute of Mental Health. We did this over a 2-year period, and we really reviewed over 600 validated survey instruments that are, range for mostly broadly used in healthcare and research, mostly around mental health. During this time, we received a lot of feedback from community partners, our participant ambassadors, which were invaluable feedback from them, other NIH institutes and centers, and of course, the subject matter experts. After all of this work was done over that 2-year period, we decided to use questions from 9 validated survey instruments, which were cognitively tested by users and have similar demographics to those participants that exist within our cohort today. So as a result, the end product is 2 surveys on mental health and well-being, and that's what I'm going to be discussing today. So on the right, you can see the chart of our task force members. These were, the primary workers and developers of these 2 surveys over that period of time. And you can see the member roles across the consortium that exists, the different awardees that were able to contribute, effort and resources from those task force members, and then the affiliation that they have. So broad diversity in our task force members as well. For our subject matter experts, we definitely leaned very heavily on our NIH institutes and centers, primarily National Institute of Mental Health, where Shelley Evanevely was a key contributor. At NIAAA, Laura Quaco was our primary contributor there, and at NIDA, Emily Einstein those were kind of our powerhouse across the NIH institutes and centers. And then outside of NIH for subject matter experts, we had contributions from Ronald Kessler and Carrie Ressler, my favorite R and K swaps. Carmel Choi, as well as Jordan Smoller on the other, was a prime task force member. And you can see the others, both nationally as well as internationally, all contributing to specific components of the survey. So broad subject matter expertise from across the NIH, as well as other organizations, academically and healthcare related. As I said, this was a long, kind of drawn out process as we were putting this together for the program. So we did look at over 600 measures across multiple domains and different content areas related to mental health and well-being. The result was a grid, how we lovingly referred to it as a grid. And that grid really documented 15 or more attributes of each measure. And so we took into consideration, of course, the domain and content area, for example, depression. We took into consideration the measurement focus. So this was looking at depressive symptoms. This is just to provide an example. Additional elements that were covered, so severity and treatment, for example, might be something related to that particular assessment. The time frame that was covered, was it the last 2 weeks? Was it the past year? Is it lifetime? How well established was it? What's the reliability and validity of the assessment? What's the length of it? So how many questions is in there? What is the branching question structure like? How complicated is it? What's the estimated duration? Sometimes this data was available and sometimes not as much. What's the burden? So this is something we take into consideration for sure when we're developing surveys for the program. How much of a burden is this going to be on the participant to donate their data as they're filling it out? Any citations and additional considerations that we should think about as we were evaluating that assessment. The age, so was that assessment tool more relevant for child, adolescent, or adult in terms of the lifespan? Was it free or were there restrictions that we needed to take into account? Was it used in other cohorts that was helpful in terms of looking at data harmonization across large cohorts? Was it recommended by FENEX? Are there languages other than English that survey assessment is in? For example, Spanish. So we're trying to have everything in the program available in English and Spanish, but are there other languages that survey assessment is in? And then administration, was it self-report or clinician administered? Of course, the clinician administered one is much harder to implement in a digital survey development process. So this is just a snapshot of what the grid looks like. So you can kind of see any reviewer comments that happened on the left, and then all of those elements that I just went through on kind of the top row. So we looked at each particular assessment tool and evaluated them for all of those components, and then did a review of all of them. So after that grid was developed, we performed this initial elimination, kind of really based on restriction. So if we needed to pay to use it, we didn't want to use it. If it was way too long, We didn't want to include it, and administration. So if it was by clinician, as I mentioned, we did not want to include that either. And we added some suggestions for new PPI modules, for example, for pediatrics, to a parking lot, right? So we kind of knew as a program we were going to be going in different directions and thought those assessments were relevant and important, but not necessarily relevant to mental health and well-being for adults. As a task force, we then determined all kind of our must-have content areas. So what would be a missed opportunity if we didn't represent a particular content area within these surveys for our participants to complete. We rated the measures and the instruments as a task force group on committee on a 4-point scale, ranging from excellent to poor. And we narrowed our focus on what we thought was important to measure and identified the easy wins. And we really balanced all of this with subject matter expert input, as I mentioned previously. So that resulted in, again, the 2 surveys. You can see here, this is the emotional health and history and well-being survey. So there are 5 sections of the survey. I'll show you in a minute what the participant-facing experience looks like for these 5 sections. We had the GAD-7 for generalized and lifetime anxiety disorders. We had present and past depression as the next content area, suicidal behaviors, which I'm very proud that we were able to include for this particular assessment as well, child and adult adversity and trauma, as well as general well-being. You can see the instruments that contributed to those questions that we included in each section, and the time frame, right, ranges from current, past 2 weeks, lifetime, previous, more than 6 months ago or so. So that is emotional health history and well-being survey. That's the first big one. The second big one is the behavioral health and personality survey. So you can see that we did take into account burden. And as we were doing this, it was very quickly identified that one big survey was not a good idea. It was going to take too long for participants to complete, and it wouldn't be a nice experience for participants. And so we then, that was one of the driving reasons to kind of divide them into the 2 that you see here, trying to balance content areas as well as burden for the participants. So behavioral health and personality survey covers adult ADHD, bipolar, psychosis, panic, obsessive compulsive disorder, social phobia and social anxiety disorder items, as well as personality. For the participant experience for those surveys, the emotional health history and well-being, instead of being grouped with the kind of clinical names for each section, they were changed to be a little bit more palatable. So the first one is feelings of general anxiety and worry, then mood and sadness, self-harm, experiences with trauma, and general well-being. This results in about 46 questions. It can go up to 93 depending on some of the branching responses. And the average time to completion online for that is about 8 minutes for the emotional health history and well-being. So a fairly light lift for completion of that particular survey, again, depending on the branching responses. For behavioral health and personality survey, the participant will see sections on attention and focus, shifts in mood, energy, and activity, unusual experiences or perceptions, experiences of panic and anxiety, recurring thoughts and behaviors, feeling of fear in certain situations, and then personality traits. We do have a personality trait return of results or return of value report that is generated after the personality traits completion. The entire survey for behavioral health and personality takes about 5 minutes to complete, and it's about 35 to 55 questions for the participants. The personality trait report, as I mentioned, is kind of shown here. Hopefully you can see it. It is generated at the end of the survey completion, and participants can choose to see it or not. It really goes over kind of the big 5 personality traits, and you can kind of see it has a picture, for example, of extroversion, and then, where they kind of range in terms of their responses to that particular section within the personality trait assessment. In terms of data that is available, so available to researchers now, so we've got over 95,000 responses from the Behavioral Health and Personality Survey, and over 98,000 from an Emotional Health and Emotional Health History and Wellbeing Survey that is available in the CDR-V8 off-cycle release. The research that we think is made possible by having some of this new data available for all of you to do research on. And I hope some of you are asking these questions, and I look forward to hearing some of the other questions that you're wanting to answer using some of this data. So how do we improve the classification of psychiatric disorders? How do genetic differences contribute to the risk for common psychiatric disorders? What's the role of lifestyle and environment in the development and progression of mental disorders? What factors can decrease the likelihood of mental disorders, and so on. So hopefully this gives some feeling for the type of questions that can be asked not only in mental health, but in other health areas that may have a mental health component, kind of moderating some of the outcomes or risk and resilience for those outcomes. I do want to cover for a minute the advantages and limitations of these surveys. Again, we're just focusing on those two surveys, emotional health history and well-being, as well as behavioral health and personality surveys. The advantages, we're very proud to say, is one of the largest data sets covering mental health and well-being among individuals in the United States. So again, this was one of my driving desires in the program, is to try to get some of this data available for researchers to be able to answer some of the questions around mental health. Another advantage is it really does complement some of the electronic health record data, especially if some of the mental health data are missing. And we'll go over what the concurrence rate is between survey data and EHR data in a minute. The survey instruments were selected with consideration of measures fielded by other large cohort studies, including the UK Biobank. We think that this helps in terms of data harmonization, standardization, and hope that these surveys will become, sort of a gold standard for other cohorts to integrate as they're trying to ask similar questions or address similar phenotypes across their cohorts over time. And then, of course, this can be combined with other data types, survey responses, genomic results, some of the wearable data as well. I look forward to hearing all of the interesting ways that you're going to combine all of us research program data to answer some of your research questions. Of course, there's limitations, right? So this is a brief, unobtrusive questionnaire and some of the most common impactful mental health and well-being experiences. It's why we really considered what were the must-have content areas for these surveys. That being said, it's not comprehensive around mental health, so it does cover a lot. It does cover common things. It does leave out some of the more less common, the more rare experiences that people may struggle with, and that a deeper dive might have included. It does have a limited collection time frame. So this initial data was collected between mid-July and the end of September 2023, and more data will be made available in the future for future releases on the researcher workbench. I'm going to go over a little bit of the demo project overview so you can kind of get a feeling for the type of data that's available. So this is a huge kind of table one for survey completion around just comparing responders to one survey versus those that did not respond to a particular question. Overall, you should know that the responders to these surveys tend to look kind of like me. They're older in age, they're predominantly female or female identifying. They're predominantly white. They have a higher education level and higher income levels. So take that into consideration as you're doing your research on these surveys, is that there are some differences in demographics across those that responded to the survey versus those that did not. When we look at prevalence for the survey responses versus electronic health record, we also see some differences. So among those participants who completed the survey, really only 56% have corresponding EHR data available. So when you look at the different phenotypes on the left-hand side, ranging from major depression, panic, psychosis, down to suicidality attempts, the survey-defined prevalence in most cases is higher than the EHR-defined prevalence. That may be because people are more likely to respond in a self-report manner than they are in terms of having these phenotypes present in their electronic health record. possible their electronic health record for this particular phenotype is captured in a different place that we don't have access to yet. So just take that into consideration as well. Hopefully this survey response data is as accurate as self-report data is, but complementary to and in addition to the electronic health record data that is also provided. So in summing up some of the demo project, we have approximately 110,000 participants that have completed at least one survey for the mental health and well-being data. There is a high prevalence of mental health conditions, as you saw in those survey responses. When you look at the surveys versus electronic health record prevalence, that survey response is higher when we compare those two data types, the survey versus EHR. And the concurrence between survey and EHR is modest to moderate. There are ongoing analyses in terms of comparisons with the UK Biobank and genetic validation studies within the demo project and other projects as well. And we think that this offers a unique opportunity to drive research in precision mental health, which was one of the primary reasons we wanted to be able to provide the opportunity for participants to donate their data on this topic and make it available for researchers. And I think, is Brandy on? Is Brandy going to cover the off-cycle data release on Researcher Workbench? Yes, there she is. I see her. Go ahead.
Thanks, Holly. All right, yep, thanks so much. Okay, so as Holly was saying, we very recently released this data to the Workbench back in February of this year. This release is what we refer to really informally as an off-cycle release. And this just means that we've been collecting data that wasn't quite packaged up and ready to go in time for a major CDR release. And so we want to get it out as quickly as possible to researchers. So we release it a little bit later as an accompanying data set. So in this case, we released CDR version 8 a little before this one. And this is incorporated into the platform, into the Researcher Workbench as its own standalone data set. So if you're working with this data, just note that at the moment, you won't be able to access it using the cohort builder or dataset builder tools. Instead, you'll need to query it and extract it from the CDR directly within your workspace. We have a really nice featured workspace set up. So our featured workspace, how to work with all of us survey data, includes a notebook for each survey. And so we have a notebook here. We've actually made one notebook for these two combined because we wanted to show you some examples of how to work with them together and also how to join these data across data from the main CDR. So there's some example code there that you can use, but I think the biggest takeaway is that these data are linkable to all other data in the major release by the person ID. And accompanying that, we always try to make available information within the support hub that just outlines our eligibility criteria, a bit of information about how the survey was designed, information about anything that could potentially be scored in terms of a scale that we source for an item. And you can find those resources in the support hub as well. We don't have a timeline for a major release following version 8, but whenever we do make that, these data would be incorporated into that major data set. And so those cohort data set builder tools will all be there for you. And that's all I have.
Awesome. And I believe that's the end of us. I think we're just ready to open up for Q&A. I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity to provide a little bit of a behind the scenes for how the survey was developed within the program and how we really leaned on a lot of subject matter experts. And I'm really grateful that they contributed their time and expertise to put together such great surveys for you to be able to do research on. So thank you to everybody, and thank you in addition to everybody that's going to be using the data and answering those questions. So, I mean, that's really where the fruit will come. So with that, I think I'll stop sharing. Yeah, Anna, is that right?
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds
Okay.
great.
See if I can
Thank
do
you
it.
so much, Holly and Brandy, for giving that amazing presentation and giving us a good overview of these two surveys.